Eleanor's eyes fluttered open to the sterile white ceiling of the hospital room. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, casting everything in a cold, clinical glow that made the world feel unreal. Every breath sent sharp, stabbing pain through her broken ribs, like shards of glass scraping against her lungs. The morphine drip barely dulled the agony radiating from her fractured pelvis, a deep, bone-crushing ache that reminded her with every tiny movement that her body had been shattered. The car accident 3 days ago had been devastating. According to the police report, a delivery truck had run a red light at the intersection of 5th and Main, slamming into the driver's side of her sedan at 45 miles per hour. She remembered the screech of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, and then nothing. She'd woken up in the ICU with a breathing tube down her throat, unable to speak or move, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred, keeping her alive. The injuries were severe. 3 broken ribs on her left side, a punctured lung that had required emergency surgery, a fractured pelvis in 2 places, a concussion, and countless bruises and lacerations. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. The impact had been severe enough that survival was almost miraculous. But as the door to her hospital room swung open and her husband Grant walked in, Eleanor wondered if survival was really such a blessing after all. His face wasn't etched with the concern or relief she'd expected to see. There were no tears of gratitude that she'd made it through, no trembling hands reaching out to touch her and confirm she was really okay. Instead, his jaw was set in a hard line, his eyes cold and distant, regarding her with the detached assessment of a businessman reviewing a quarterly report. He didn't rush to her bedside like a worried husband should. He didn't ask how she was feeling or if the pain was manageable. He simply stood there in his expensive charcoal suit, briefcase in hand, looking at her as if she were nothing more than a business transaction that needed to be closed, an inconvenient item on his to-do list. Eleanor's heart, already fragile from trauma and medication, began to race. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. This wasn't the man she'd married 8 years ago, the man who'd promised to love her in sickness and in health. This was a stranger wearing her husband's face. Grant pulled the visitor's chair close to her bed, but not close enough to actually touch her. He maintained a careful distance, as if even proximity to her was distasteful. He opened his briefcase with a crisp, businesslike snap and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. Eleanor's foggy mind struggled to focus through the haze of medication. The morphine made everything feel like it was happening underwater, thoughts moving slowly, reality slightly out of reach. "Grant?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and raspy from the ventilator they'd removed that morning. Her throat still felt raw, and speaking was difficult. "What is that? What's going on?" He didn't meet her eyes as he slid the papers onto her lap, right over the thin hospital blanket. The weight of them felt significant, ominous. "Divorce papers, Eleanor. I need you to sign them, now, while you're still coherent enough to understand what you're signing." The words hit her harder than the collision that had put her in this hospital bed. Divorce papers? In a hospital room? While she could barely move, could barely think, could barely process that she was even alive. "You can't be serious," she managed, tears already burning her eyes, blurring her vision. "This has to be some kind of mistake. Grant, I almost died. I'm lying here with broken bones, and you're talking about divorce?" "I'm very serious, and I need this done quickly, Eleanor. You're medicated, yes, but you're lucid enough to sign legal documents. The doctors confirmed it. Just sign on the marked lines, and we can both move forward with our lives." His tone was mechanical, rehearsed, utterly devoid of emotion. This wasn't a spontaneous decision made in a moment of panic or stress. This was planned, calculated, cold. Eleanor's heart trembled as she tried to push the papers away, but the movement sent shooting pain through her ribs. She gasped, and for just a moment, something flickered in Grant's eyes. Was it guilt? Regret? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by steely determination. "Why?" Eleanor breathed, tears now streaming down her face. Why now? What did I do to deserve this? I've been nothing but faithful to you, nothing but supportive of your career, your dreams. I put my own career on hold to be there for you. I've loved you with everything I have. And this is how you repay me? By serving me divorce papers while I'm lying in a hospital bed, fighting to recover? Grant finally met her eyes, and what she saw there chilled her to the bone. There was no love, no remorse, no humanity, just cold calculation. You didn't do anything wrong, Eleanor. That's not what this is about. This is about me needing to move on with my life. We've grown apart. We want different things. And frankly, I can't wait any longer for you to get back on your feet. The timing is unfortunate, I'll admit, but it's necessary. Unfortunate? Eleanor's voice rose, though it took every ounce of strength she had. My nearly dying is unfortunate? You serving me divorce papers while I'm drugged and broken is just bad timing? What happened to you, Grant? When did you become this monster? He stood abruptly, placing a pen on top of the papers. I'll leave these with you. You have 24 hours to sign them, Eleanor. If you don't, my attorneys will proceed anyway. And trust me, you don't want this to get ugly. Sign the papers, accept the settlement I'm offering, and we can part ways cleanly. He turned toward the door, and Eleanor called out, her voice cracked with desperation. Grant, please, don't do this. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. Please, don't throw away 8 years of marriage like this. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle, but he didn't turn around. 8 years, he repeated quietly. You think those years meant something? Eleanor, I've been done with this marriage for a long time. This accident just provided the right opportunity to finally end it. And with that, he walked out, leaving Eleanor alone with her pain, her tears, and a stack of divorce papers that felt like a death sentence. 2 days passed in a blur of pain medication, physical therapy assessments, and the constant, intrusive presence of doctors and nurses. Eleanor tried to eat, tried to sleep, tried to make sense of what Grant had done, but nothing made sense anymore. Her entire world had been upended. Mo, her best friend since college, had been by her side constantly, bringing her real food to replace the hospital meals, helping her wash her hair in the awkward basin, and providing the emotional support that Grant should have been giving. On the 3rd day after Grant's devastating visit, Mo burst into the hospital room with an energy that was different from her usual supportive presence. Her face was flushed, not with exertion, but with fury. Her hands were shaking, and Eleanor could see she'd been crying. Eleanor, I have something to tell you, and you're not going to like it, Mo said without preamble, closing the door behind her for privacy. I've been doing some digging, making some calls to people we know, and I found out why Grant is doing this now, why he couldn't even wait until you were recovered. Eleanor pushed herself up slightly against the pillows, wincing at the pain. What did you find out? Mo pulled out her phone with trembling hands and sat on the edge of the hospital bed, careful not to jostle Eleanor's injuries. She swiped through her photo gallery and then held the screen up for Eleanor to see. The first photo showed Grant with a young woman, maybe late 20s, both of them laughing over cocktails at an upscale restaurant Eleanor recognized as Marcello's, the Italian place across town. The woman was beautiful, sleek dark hair, perfect makeup, designer clothes. And the way Grant was looking at her, the way his hand rested on her lower back, made Eleanor's stomach turn. Keep looking, Mo said quietly, swiping to the next photo. This one showed Grant and the same woman entering a hotel together, his arm around her shoulders. The next photo was from what looked like a beach vacation, Grant and the mystery woman in swimwear kissing against a sunset backdrop. Photo after photo, each one a knife to Eleanor's heart. Her name is Vivian Chase, Mo said, her voice shaking with fury barely held in check. She works in Whitmore Technology's marketing department. Grant hired her 3 years ago. Eleanor, these photos go back 3 years. The timestamps, the metadata, I had a friend in tech verify it all. This isn't some recent fling or mistake. This has been going on for 3 years. Your entire marriage for the last 3 years has been a lie. Eleanor felt like she couldn't breathe, and not because of her punctured lung. 3 years. 3 years of betrayal. 3 years of him coming home to her, kissing her goodnight, making love to her, all while carrying on an affair with someone else. 3 years of her being completely blind, completely trusting, while he made a fool of her. Everyone knew, Eleanor, Mo continued, tears now streaming down her face. I talked to people who work at his company, people in your social circle. Everyone knew about Vivian except you. They all thought you knew and were just staying for, I don't know, for money or appearances or something. But you didn't know. You were the only one who didn't know, and no one had the decency to tell you. Before Eleanor could process this new layer of devastation, before she could even begin to formulate a response, her cell phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, a local area code, but not one she recognized. Normally she wouldn't have answered, but something compelled her to reach for it. Maybe it was the shock, maybe it was the need for any distraction from the photos Mo had just shown her. Hello? Her voice was barely a whisper. Eleanor? The voice on the other end was one she hadn't heard in 15 years. It was deep, weathered by age, but still strong. It was filled with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. Relief? Fear? Desperation? Eleanor, it's your father, Raymond Calloway. Please, sweetheart, don't hang up. I know you have every reason to. I know you never wanted to hear from me again, but I need to talk to you. It's about Grant. I need to talk to you about your husband. Eleanor's breath caught. Her father, Raymond Calloway, the man she'd cut out of her life 15 years ago at her mother's funeral, the man she blamed for her mother's death, the man she'd sworn she'd never speak to again. How did you get this number? Eleanor asked, her voice cold, despite the tears still streaming down her face from Mo's revelation. I've always had it, Eleanor. I've been watching over you, even though you didn't want me in your life. I respected your wishes to stay away, but I never stopped caring about you, never stopped keeping track of how you were doing. And right now, you need to know what your husband has been planning. Please, just give me 5 minutes. If you still want to hang up after that, I'll never contact you again, I promise. Against her better judgment, against 15 years of anger and resentment, Eleanor found herself saying, 5 minutes, that's all you get. Mo looked at her with concern, mouthing, "Who is it?" But Eleanor held up a hand, focusing on the voice of the father she'd exiled from her life. "Thank you," Raymond said, and she could hear the emotion in his voice. "Eleanor, I know you think I abandoned you and your mother. I know you think I let her die because I was too cheap or too selfish to pay for her treatment. But that's not what happened, and I promise I'll explain that later. Right now, I need you to understand what Grant is doing." "I already know about his affair," Eleanor said bitterly. "My friend just showed me the proof. 3 years he's been cheating on me." "It's worse than that, sweetheart. Much worse." Raymond's voice grew stronger, more confident, taking on the tone of a man accustomed to wielding power. "I've been watching Grant for the past year, ever since I noticed some suspicious activity around his company. I had my security team dig deeper, and what we found... Eleanor, Grant hasn't just been unfaithful. He's been embezzling money from Whitmore Technologies for years. Millions of dollars moved through shell companies and offshore accounts." Eleanor felt the room spinning. What? No, that can't be right. Grant built that company from the ground up. Why would he steal from his own business? Greed, ego, the need to fund his affair and maintain a lifestyle beyond what the company's legitimate profits could support, Raymond explained. But here's the worst part, Eleanor. He's been setting you up to take the fall. Your signature on financial documents, your name on some of the accounts he created. If the authorities were to investigate, right now, all the evidence points to you as the embezzler. The words were like physical blows. First the affair, now this? Why are you telling me this? And how do you even know all this? Because 6 months ago, when I learned what Grant was planning, I took action, Raymond said, and Eleanor could hear the satisfaction in his voice. I purchased Whitmore Technologies through a series of shell corporations and investment groups so that Grant wouldn't know who the buyer was. As of 6 months ago, I own 51% of his company. I'm the majority shareholder. He doesn't know yet. The paperwork has been structured to hide my identity, but I'm his boss now. And Eleanor, I did it to protect you. Eleanor's mind reeled. Her estranged father, the man she hadn't spoken to in 15 years, had secretly purchased her husband's company to protect her from her husband's crimes? It was too much to process, too surreal to be real. I don't understand. Why would you do that? Why would you spend what must have been millions of dollars to buy out a tech company just to protect me? Because you're my daughter, Raymond said simply. Because I failed your mother, and I wasn't going to fail you, too. Because when my security team brought me the information about what Grant was planning, I knew I had to act. He was going to divorce you, frame you for embezzlement, and let you rot in prison while he ran off with his mistress and the money he'd stolen. I couldn't let that happen. How long have you been watching me? Eleanor asked, not sure if she should feel protected or violated by this information. Since the day you told me never to contact you again, Raymond admitted. I honored your wishes not to be in your life, Eleanor, but I never stopped being your father. I made sure you were safe, that you had opportunities, and no harm came to you that I could prevent. When you married Grant, I had him investigated. He came up clean then. Ambitious, driven, but clean. It wasn't until about a year ago that things started to change. That's when I began looking more closely, and that's when I discovered what he'd become. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different from the tears she'd cried over Grant's betrayal. These were complicated tears. Anger, confusion, relief, and 15 years of buried grief all mixing together. Why should I believe you? She asked, her voice breaking. You abandoned me when Mom was dying. You let her die because you were too cheap to pay for her experimental treatment. You had all the money in the world and you watched her waste away because you couldn't be bothered to spend it on saving her life. So why should I believe anything you say now? The silence on the line was heavy with pain. Eleanor could hear her father breathing, could almost feel him gathering himself to say something difficult. Finally, Raymond spoke, and his voice was thick with emotion, breaking on almost every word. Eleanor, I'm going to send my attorney to see you tomorrow. His name is Dennis Rothstein. He's been with me for 30 years, and he has documents that your mother left for you. Letters, financial records, medical records, things she made me promise not to show you until, well, she thought it would be after I died. But I think you need to see them now. You need to know the truth. What truth? Eleanor demanded. What could possibly justify letting her die? I didn't let her die, sweetheart. She chose to die. Raymond's voice broke completely. Your mother was offered the experimental treatment. I begged her to take it. I had the money, more than enough money. I told her we'd spend every penny I had if it meant saving her. But she refused. She refused the treatment, Eleanor. That's a lie, Eleanor said flatly. Mom wanted to live. She wanted to see me graduate college, get married, have children. She wouldn't have just given up. She didn't give up. She made a choice, a mother's choice. Raymond was crying now, openly sobbing. The experimental treatment had a 5% success rate, 5% chance it might give her another year, maybe 2. But it would cost everything, $700,000, maybe more. And your mother looked at those odds, and she looked at you, and she made a decision. What decision? Eleanor whispered. She decided that spending $700,000 for a 5% chance at another year with you wasn't worth it. Not when that money could guarantee your entire future. She chose to refuse the treatment so that the money could go to you instead, for your education, for your future, for your security. She made me promise to use that money to watch over you, to protect you, to give you every opportunity. She made me swear I'd never tell you the truth because she knew you'd blame yourself, knew you'd think you should have insisted she take the treatment. Hating me was easier for you than accepting that she chose to leave. I let you hate me because it's what she wanted, because she thought it would be easier for you to blame me than carry the weight of her sacrifice. Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 15 years of anger, 15 years of blaming her father, and it was all based on a lie she'd told herself because the truth was too painful to accept. Dennis will come tomorrow, Raymond continued, his voice steadying slightly. He has everything. All the letters she left to you in those final months, all the documentation of my offering to pay for treatment and her refusal, medical records showing her decision was sound and competent. She wrote it all down for you, Eleanor. She wanted you to know someday that you were worth more to her than her own life. Eleanor lay awake all night, unable to sleep despite the pain medication, despite the exhaustion, despite everything. Her mind was spinning with too many revelations, too many betrayals, too many truths she'd been blind to. By morning, she'd made a decision. She couldn't stay in this hospital bed being passive while her life fell apart around her. She needed to take action, needed to take control, needed to fight back. When the doctor came in for morning rounds, Eleanor announced she was discharging herself. The doctor, a kind woman in her 50s named Dr. Patterson, was immediately concerned. Mrs. Whitmore, you're not ready. Your pelvis fracture needs at least another week of rest before you should even attempt to walk with assistance. Your lung is still healing. You need physical therapy. You need monitoring. I need to go home, Eleanor said firmly. I'll come back for outpatient therapy. I'll follow all your instructions, but I can't stay here anymore. Please, just sign the discharge papers. Dr. Patterson looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. This is against my medical advice. You understand that. You'll be in significant pain. You'll need help with almost everything. Dressing, bathing, moving around. Do you have someone who can stay with you? I'll stay with her, Mo said immediately, from her position in the corner chair, 24/7 until she's better. 3 hours later, Eleanor was in Mo's car, crutches in the back seat, pain medication in her purse, and an address in the GPS that made Mo look at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to go where? Mo asked, staring at the upscale apartment complex address Eleanor had given her. I want to go see Vivian Chase, Eleanor said calmly. Though inside she was anything but calm. Grant's mistress. I want to talk to her. Eleanor, are you sure that's a good idea? I mean, you just got out of the hospital. You're on pain meds. Maybe confronting your husband's mistress isn't the best plan right now? Mo, my father is apparently a trillionaire who bought my husband's company to protect me. My husband has been cheating on me for 3 years and embezzling millions of dollars while framing me for his crimes. I think the time for good ideas is long past. I need to understand what's happening, and I think Vivian Chase might have some answers. Mo sighed, but put the car in drive. Okay, but I'm coming with you, and if this goes sideways, we're leaving immediately. The apartment building was sleek and modern, all glass and steel, with a doorman and probably a gym and pool on the premises. Definitely not the kind of place someone could afford on a marketing director's salary, which told Eleanor everything she needed to know about who was paying Vivian's rent. Mo helped Eleanor out of the car and handed her the crutches. Every step sent pain shooting through her pelvis, but Eleanor gritted her teeth and kept moving. She had to do this. Had to know. The doorman tried to stop them, but Eleanor gave Vivian's name and unit number, and apparently they were expected because he stepped aside with a dubious look. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like an eternity. Eleanor's heart was pounding, and she wasn't sure if it was from fear, anger, pain, or all three. Unit 1207. Eleanor hobbled to the door and knocked. each movement carefully calculated to minimize the pain in her broken body. She heard footsteps inside, then the sound of the peephole cover moving. The door opened slowly, and the woman from the photos stood there in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, looking nothing like the glamorous mistress Eleanor had imagined. Her face was bare of makeup, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy as if she'd been crying for days. When she saw Eleanor standing there on crutches, Vivian's face went pale, all color draining away. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're not ready. I can explain." "May I come in?" Eleanor asked, her voice surprisingly steady given that she was face to face with the woman who'd been sleeping with her husband for 3 years. Vivian hesitated, then nodded and stepped back, opening the door wider. The apartment was immaculate and expensively furnished, but it had a sterile quality to it, like a hotel room rather than a home. There were no personal photos, no mementos, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived here beyond the most superficial level. Eleanor hobbled to the cream-colored sofa and carefully lowered herself, biting back a gasp of pain. Mo stayed standing, positioning herself protectively near Eleanor, arms crossed and expression hostile. Vivian remained standing near the door, wringing her hands. "I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't fix what I did, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "How does an affair that lasts 3 years happen if you don't mean for it to?" Eleanor asked, her voice harder than she expected. That seems like a lot of choices, a lot of intentional decisions to be unintentional. Vivian flinched, but nodded. "You're right. You're absolutely right. Can I tell you how it started? Not as an excuse, just so you understand." Eleanor nodded curtly. She needed information more than she needed to punish this woman right now, though part of her wanted to scream and rage and demand to know how Vivian could do this to another woman. Vivian sat down in the chair across from the sofa, perched on the edge like she might bolt at any moment. "I started working at Whitmore Technologies 3 years ago. I was 26, just out of a bad relationship, new to the city. Grant was charming, attentive, successful. He told me he was separated from your wife, that the divorce was almost final, that he was just waiting for the papers to be processed. He said you two had grown apart, that the marriage had been over for years, but you were both going through the motions." Eleanor felt sick. It was such a classic, cliché lie. But hearing it out loud, hearing how easily Grant had manipulated this woman, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I believed him," Vivian continued, her voice shaking. "For almost a year, I believed him. He took me to restaurants in other cities. We went on weekend trips to places where no one would know him. He said it was because the divorce wasn't final yet and he didn't want to cause complications. By the time I learned the truth, that you two weren't separated, that there were no divorce papers, that your marriage was very much intact, it was too late." "Too late how?" Mo demanded from her position near Eleanor. Vivian looked up and there was real fear in her eyes. "By the time I found out Grant had lied, he'd already used my name for things. Fraudulent accounts, shell companies, business deals that I had no knowledge of but bore my signature. He told me if I left him, if I told anyone about the affair, he'd make sure I went to prison for fraud and embezzlement. He had documentation, he had records, all showing that I was the one behind illegal financial activities. He said he'd ruin me, destroy my career, make sure I never worked in this industry again." Eleanor leaned forward despite the pain it caused. "You're saying Grant threatened you? That he's been blackmailing you to continue the affair?" "For the past 2 years, yes," Vivian said, tears now streaming freely down her face. "The first year, I was a willing participant. I thought I was in love with a man going through a difficult divorce, but once I found out the truth, once I tried to end it, he showed me what he'd been doing, using my credentials, my name, my signature, forged on some documents, manipulated onto others. He'd been setting me up from the beginning, creating insurance so I couldn't leave him." She stood abruptly and went to a desk in the corner, pulling out a flash drive from a locked drawer. She came back and held it out to Eleanor with shaking hands. I've been documenting everything for the past 18 months, trying to protect myself, trying to gather evidence that might prove I wasn't the mastermind behind his schemes. Bank statements, emails, recorded phone calls where he admits to forging my signature, screenshots of accounts I never opened. It's all here. Everything you need to prove what he's been doing. To me, to you, to the company. Eleanor took the flash drive, turning it over in her hands. Such a small thing to contain so much destruction. Why give this to me? Why not go to the police yourself? Because I'm terrified, Vivian admitted, sitting back down and putting her face in her hands. Because Grant is smart and connected and has expensive lawyers. Because every attorney I've consulted has told me that even with this evidence, I could still face charges. Because my word against his, even with documentation, might not be enough. But you're his wife. You have legal standing. You have rights to company information that I don't have. And more than that, you deserve justice. I destroyed your marriage, even if I didn't know what I was doing at first. I owe you this. Eleanor looked at the flash drive, then back at Vivian. Despite everything, despite the affair and the betrayal, she found herself feeling something unexpected. Sympathy. Vivian wasn't the villain in this story. She was another victim of Grant's manipulation, another woman he'd used and destroyed for his own benefit. "Thank you," Eleanor said quietly, "for being honest with me, for giving me this. I can't say I forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever, but I understand that you were manipulated too, and I'm sorry for what he did to you." Vivian looked up, surprise written across her tear-stained face. "You're sorry? Mrs. Whitmore, I slept with your husband for 3 years. Why would you be sorry?" "Because I know what it's like to be deceived by Grant, to think you know someone, to trust them, and then find out everything was a lie. And I'm sorry that he used you, threatened you, and made you a prisoner in your own life." Eleanor struggled to her feet with Mo's help. "One more question. The day I was in the accident, do you know where Grant was?" Vivian's face crumpled. "He was with me. We were at lunch discussing the divorce he was planning to serve you. He got the call about your accident, and he barely reacted. He said it was unfortunate timing, but maybe it would make things easier. I should have known then, should have realized how cold he was, but I was so trapped in my own fear that I didn't see it clearly." Eleanor nodded slowly. So Grant had been with his mistress, planning Eleanor's destruction when she'd nearly died, and his first thought was whether her near death would be convenient for his plans. The monster she'd been married to was worse than she'd even imagined. Mo drove Eleanor to the address that Dennis Rothstein, her father's attorney, had provided that morning. Eleanor had been so focused on confronting Vivian that she'd almost forgotten about the meeting Dennis had requested. But now, holding Vivian's flash drive in one hand and facing the truth about her mother's death, Eleanor needed to face her father. The estate was in an exclusive area of the city that Eleanor hadn't been to since she was a teenager. As Mo pulled through the gates and drove up the long tree-lined driveway, memories came flooding back. She'd grown up here, in this mansion with its manicured gardens and its guest houses, and its pool where she'd spent countless summer afternoons. After her mother died, she'd sworn she'd never come back, and she'd kept that promise for 15 years. Until now. Dennis Rothstein was waiting for them at the front door, a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and an expensive suit. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you. Your father is resting right now. He hasn't been well lately, but he asked me to show you something first, before you see him." He led them through the familiar halls, past the formal living room where Eleanor remembered family photos being taken, past the library where her mother used to read to her, past the dining room where they'd shared countless meals. Everything looked exactly as she remembered, frozen in time, as if waiting for her to come home. Dennis led them to her father's study, a room Eleanor had rarely been allowed in as a child. It was masculine and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and leather furniture that smelled of age and money. He went to a wall safe hidden behind a painting, entered a code, and removed a wooden box. "Your mother left these for you," Dennis said, placing the box on the desk. "She wrote them in the final months of her life, when she knew treatment wasn't going to save her. Raymond has kept them safe all these years, waiting for the right time. He believes that time is now." Eleanor approached the box slowly, using her crutches for support. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to her in her mother's familiar handwriting. Some were yellowed with age, others were in better condition, but all of them were filled with her mother's words, her mother's love. With shaking hands, Eleanor opened the first letter. "My darling Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you've had many years of happiness without me. I hope you've lived fully, loved deeply, and chased every dream. I hope you've forgiven your father by now, though I know how stubborn you are. You get that from me, I'm afraid. I need you to know the truth about my illness and the treatment I refused. Your father begged me to try the experimental therapy. He had the money, willing to spend every penny, even willing to go into debt if necessary. He loved me that much. But I looked at the odds. 5% chance of success, maybe 12 more months if it worked, all at the cost of $700,000. And then I looked at you. You were about to start college. You had dreams of studying literature, of maybe becoming a teacher or a writer. You had your whole life ahead of you. And I realized that I had a choice. I could spend a fortune on a 5% chance at a few more months with you, or I could make sure you had everything you needed for a lifetime. It wasn't a hard choice, sweetheart. You might think it was, but it wasn't. Because every mother would make the same choice. Your future, your education, your security, your ability to chase your dreams without being burdened by debt or limitation. That was worth more to me than a few more months of watching you grow. I got 18 years with you, Eleanor. 18 beautiful, perfect years. That was my blessing. And I chose to make sure you'd have 60 or 70 more beautiful years, even if I couldn't be there to see them. I know you'll want to blame someone. That's human nature. And I asked your father to let you blame him. I asked him to keep this truth from you because I didn't want you carrying the weight of my choice. I didn't want you thinking you should have convinced me to try the treatment. Didn't want you feeling guilty that I chose you over myself. Because, darling, you were worth that choice. You were worth every sacrifice. You were worth everything. Love yourself the way I loved you. Live fully. And forgive your father, who only ever did what I asked him to do. He's a good man who loved me enough to honor my wishes, even when it meant losing you, too. Forever your mother, Catherine. Eleanor read through the letters one by one, tears streaming down her face. Mo sat beside her, reading over her shoulder, crying too. Each letter revealed more of her mother's thoughts during those final months, her hopes for Eleanor's future, her instructions to Raymond to watch over their daughter, her absolute certainty that sacrificing her own slim chance at survival was the right choice for Eleanor's future. There were also medical records, financial documents showing Raymond's repeated offers to pay for treatment, and her mother's signed refusals. Legal documents proving her mother was of sound mind when she made her decision. Everything was there, proving that Eleanor's father had tried to save his wife, and that Catherine Calloway had chosen her daughter's future over her own life. When Eleanor finally looked up from the papers, her face was red and swollen from the crying, but there was a clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Dennis had quietly left the room at some point, giving her privacy to read and process. "I need to see him," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse. "I need to see my father." Mo helped her stand, helped her navigate the crutches down the hall to another room, a bedroom that had been converted into something between a bedroom and a hospital room. There were medical monitors, an IV stand, and a hospital bed. And in that bed, looking far older and frailer than Eleanor remembered, was Raymond Calloway. Her father's eyes opened when she entered, and tears immediately began streaming down his weathered face. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice weak, "you came. I didn't dare hope you would." Eleanor made her way slowly to the bedside, each step painful but necessary. When she reached him, she set aside her crutches and carefully sat on the edge of the bed. For a long moment, she just looked at him, this man who was her father, who had loved her mother, who had honored a dying woman's wishes even when it cost him his daughter. "I'm sorry," she said, the words coming out in a sob. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I blamed you for something that wasn't your fault. I wasted 15 years being angry at you when I should have been grateful that you loved Mom enough to honor her wishes, that you loved me enough to watch over me from a distance. I'm so sorry." Raymond reached up with a trembling hand and touched her face, the first time he'd touched his daughter in 15 years. "No, sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. You were grieving. You needed someone to blame, and I was happy to be that person if it made your pain more bearable. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day, and I never will." They cried together, father and daughter, healing a wound that had been open for 15 years. Mo quietly slipped out of the room, giving them privacy for their reconciliation. "Dennis told me about Grant, about what he's been doing, what he tried to do to you. We're going to stop him, Eleanor, together. I've been saving the evidence, building a case. He won't get away with this." "I know," Eleanor said, showing him the flash drive Vivian had given her. "And I have more evidence now, from his mistress. Grant thought he was clever framing 2 women for his crimes, but he made one critical mistake." "What's that?" Eleanor smiled, and it was a fierce smile of a woman who had been broken, but was putting herself back together stronger than before. Friday evening arrived with the heavy weight of impending confrontation. Eleanor had spent the past 3 days doing her research, reviewing the evidence from Vivian's flash drive, meeting with Dennis and her father's team of attorneys and forensic accountants. The picture that emerged was damning beyond anything she'd initially imagined. Grant hadn't just been embezzling from Whitmore Technologies. He'd been running an elaborate scheme that involved falsifying contracts, inflating vendor payments, creating phantom employees, and funneling money through a network of shell companies. The total amount he'd stolen was estimated at close to $12 million over the course of 5 years. And all of it, every false signature, every fraudulent document, had been carefully crafted to implicate either Eleanor or Vivian as the architects of the scheme. Grant had been meticulous in his planning, creating a paper trail that pointed away from himself and toward the women in his life. He'd even gone so far as to forge Eleanor's signature on documents she'd never seen, using samples from legitimate paperwork she'd signed when they'd purchased their house. But he'd made mistakes. In his arrogance, he'd assumed the women he was framing would never compare notes, would never work together, would never be smart enough or brave enough to challenge him. He'd underestimated them all. Eleanor had texted Grant on Thursday, asking to meet for dinner to discuss the divorce terms civilly. Her tone had been conciliatory, defeated, exactly what Grant would have expected from a woman who'd just been betrayed and served divorce papers in a hospital bed. He'd agreed immediately, probably thinking she was ready to cave to his demands, to sign whatever settlement he offered just to make the pain stop. He had no idea what was coming. The restaurant she'd chosen was Marcello's, the same Italian place where Grant had taken Vivian, captured in one of the photos Mo had shown her. Eleanor had chosen it deliberately. She wanted him to feel the irony, even if he didn't understand it yet. Mo picked Eleanor up at 7. Eleanor was still using crutches, still in considerable pain, but she'd taken extra care with her appearance tonight. She wore a navy blue dress that was both elegant and professional, had done her makeup to cover the lingering bruises, and had styled her hair in a way that made her look powerful rather than broken. She wanted Grant to see that she wasn't defeated. She wanted him to see exactly who he was dealing with. They arrived at Marcello's at 7:30. Grant was already seated at a corner table, nursing a scotch and checking his phone. When he saw Eleanor hobbling toward him on crutches with Mo's assistance, a flash of something, guilt, annoyance, impatience, crossed his face before he schooled his features into a mask of polite concern. "Eleanor," he said, standing as she approached, but not moving to help her, "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable about this. And Mo, I didn't realize you'd be joining us." "I'm here for moral support," Mo said coolly, helping Eleanor into her chair before taking the seat beside her. The waiter appeared and Eleanor ordered a glass of wine she had no intention of drinking. She needed to be completely clear-headed for what came next. Grant wasted no time once they were alone. He pulled a document from his briefcase and slid it across the white tablecloth. "I've prepared a settlement offer that I think you'll find more than generous, Eleanor, under the circumstances." Eleanor glanced at the document without picking it up. Even from a cursory read, she could see what he was offering. $50,000, her car, and her personal belongings. Nothing else. No share of the house they'd bought together, no portion of the business she'd supported him in building, no retirement accounts, nothing. He was offering her barely enough to rent an apartment for a year while he kept everything they'd built together over 8 years of marriage. "Generous," Eleanor repeated, her voice dripping with irony. "And that's an interesting word choice, Grant. Almost as interesting as unfortunate timing was when you heard I'd been in a car accident that could have killed me." Grant's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained smooth. "I understand you're upset, Eleanor. This isn't how either of us wanted things to end. But the reality is that Whitmore Technologies is my company. I built it. You were never involved in the business side. This settlement reflects that reality." Eleanor said, taking a slow sip of the wine that had been placed in front of her. "Tell me, Grant, in this narrative where you built everything and I contributed nothing, how do you account for the fact that I put my own career on hold to support yours? That I hosted countless dinners for your clients and investors? That I used my inheritance from my grandmother to help fund the company in its early days?" "That was a gift," Grant said dismissively, "a contribution to the marital assets. It doesn't entitle you to ownership of the company." Eleanor smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "You're right about that. It doesn't entitle me to ownership of the company, but this does." She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table, screen facing him. On it was a photograph of a stock certificate showing that Callaway Holdings owned 51% of Whitmore Technologies. Grant's face went pale as he stared at the phone. What is this? Some kind of forgery?" "It's quite real, I assure you," Eleanor said calmly. "Callaway Holdings, that's my father's investment company, by the way, purchased controlling interest in Whitmore Technologies 6 months ago. I believe your CFO told you that the sale was to a consortium of anonymous investors. Well, surprise, it was my father, which means technically I don't need you to give me anything in the divorce settlement because I already own more of your company than you do." Grant's hand was shaking as he picked up his scotch and drained it in one gulp. "Your father? Raymond Callaway? I thought you hadn't spoken to him in years." "I hadn't," Eleanor agreed, "but family has a way of coming together when one of their own is threatened. And Grant, you threatened me. You betrayed me, and now you're going to pay for it." She pulled out another document, printed photos from Vivian's flash drive, images of Grant at restaurants with Vivian, at hotels, on vacation, bank statements showing the accounts he'd opened in Vivian's name, emails where he discussed the embezzlement scheme in thinly veiled language. "I know about the affair, Grant. I know you've been sleeping with Vivian Chase for 3 years. I know you used her name to open fraudulent accounts and threatened her when she tried to end things. I know about the shell companies, the falsified contracts, the phantom employees. I know you've embezzled approximately $12 million from Whitmore Technologies over the past 5 years. And I know you've been carefully crafting a paper trail to make it look like I was the one behind it all." Grant's face had gone from pale to gray. He looked like he might be sick. I don't know what lies that bitch told you, but don't, Eleanor said sharply, cutting him off. Don't make this worse by lying. I have evidence, Grant. Not just from Vivian, but from forensic accountants my father hired. Bank records, digital forensics, everything. We can trace every dollar you stole, every signature you forged, every crime you committed. She leaned forward, ignoring the pain it caused in her ribs. Here's what's going to happen. You have until Monday morning, that gives you the weekend, to meet with your attorney and prepare a settlement offer. A real settlement offer. You're going to give me exactly half of everything we acquired during our marriage, as California law requires. You're going to sign over your shares in the company to me, since mine are already the majority. You're going to provide documentation of every crime you committed, and you're going to cooperate fully with the authorities. And if I don't? Grant's voice was barely a whisper, but there was still defiance in his eyes. Don't, Eleanor said sharply, cutting him off. Don't make this worse by lying. I have evidence, Grant, not just from Vivian, but from forensic accountants my father hired. Bank records, digital forensics, everything. We can trace every dollar you stole, every signature you forged, every crime you committed. She leaned forward, ignoring the pain it caused in her ribs. Here's what's going to happen. You have until Monday morning, that gives you the weekend, to meet with your attorney and prepare a settlement offer. A real settlement offer. You're going to give me exactly half of everything we acquired during our marriage, as California law requires. You're going to sign over your shares in the company to me, since mine are already the majority. You're going to provide documentation of every crime you committed, and you're going to cooperate fully with the authorities. And if I don't? Grant's voice was barely a whisper, but there was still defiance in his eyes. You made my life hell, Grant. The difference is, now I'm fighting back. Enjoy your weekend. I hope you use it to make the right choice, though I doubt you will. Men like you never do until they're left with no other option. The weekend passed with agonizing slowness. Eleanor spent most of it at her father's estate, working with Dennis and the team of attorneys to prepare for every possible scenario. Grant hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't reached out in any way. His silence spoke volumes. He was either consulting with his own lawyers, trying to find a way out, or he was in denial about the seriousness of his situation. Eleanor suspected it was the latter. Grant had always been arrogant, always believed he was the smartest person in any room. The idea that he'd been outmaneuvered by his wife and his mistress, the two women he'd most underestimated, would be incomprehensible to him. Monday morning arrived bright and clear. Eleanor had spent the night at her father's house, unable to sleep, running through every possible outcome in her mind. Raymond wanted to attend the board meeting, but his health wouldn't allow it. Instead, he held Eleanor's hand and told her how proud he was of her. Your mother would be proud too, sweetheart. Go show that bastard what it means to underestimate a Callaway woman. Dennis drove Eleanor to the Whitmore Technologies building at 8:30. The board meeting was scheduled at 9, and Eleanor wanted to be there early, wanted to be sitting at the head of the table when Grant arrived. She wanted him to walk in and immediately understand that everything had changed. The board members had been briefed over the weekend. Dennis had sent them each a comprehensive packet outlining the evidence against Grant, the ownership structure of the company, and the agenda for today's meeting. They'd all agreed to attend, their curiosity and concern overriding any loyalty they might have felt towards Grant. Eleanor settled into the chairman's seat at 9 exactly. It was a power position, at the head of the long mahogany table in the executive conference room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the city skyline, the world continuing on oblivious to the drama about to unfold in this room. The board members filled in one by one. There were 8 of them, ranging from the CFO and COO to 3 external investors and 2 independent directors. They all looked at Eleanor with a mixture of sympathy, curiosity, and concern. They'd all known her as Grant's wife, the woman who showed up to company parties and charity events. Now she was here as the majority owner, about to take down the man who'd built this company. At 9:05, Grant walked in.